Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the brand new upcoming 5th edition D&D Monster Manual. This was sent to me by Wizards of the Coast, and I do want to thank them for sending these books my way. However, as is always the case, they are not scripting or pre-screening the video or anything like that before it goes live. They'll get to see it at the same time as everybody else, and the opinions that I express are 100% completely and totally my own. This was a book that I was really looking forward to, and generally I try to avoid watching a lot of like the preview videos that Wizards of the Coast do for their upcoming books. Like, I really didn't watch much of their Player's Handbook or their DMG videos that they were doing. I did get to see some clips of it because before I got YouTube Premium, that was part of like the ads that would run on YouTube, so I would get to hear the term brutal strike an awful lot. But I actually sat down and I watched the Monster Manual video because this was the book that I was the most interested in terms of what needed to be done to improve the monsters, especially the higher level monsters, and make them feel like more of a genuine threat. So I'm not going to be doing like a full flip through or anything like that of the book. I'm only going to be focusing on a couple of monsters specifically, but let's sort of dive into it here. The first thing we have are the covers, and I really like the regular versions of like the normal retail versions of the new 5e core rulebooks. The Player's Handbook, I think, has a really great cover. The DMG with Venger and Warduke on there, like, I absolutely love that cover. And this is another fantastic cover with Minsk. I didn't realize that was Minsk, and you see like Booze leaping. I don't know if he's leaping down towards the like Ogre and Displacer Beast, or if he's leaping up towards the Beholder, because he does like to go for the eyes. But it's still really cool to see like some of these iconic characters gracing the covers of these books. The Game Store exclusive covers I was less thrilled with in general. Like, the Player's Handbook one was good. The DMG one had a very stylized Lolth, which isn't to my taste, but a lot of people really do like that one. But this cover is absolutely incredible. So you got, again, sort of like the metallic sheen there with the Mind Flare holding the little tadpole, which is just really, really cool. And then you got the 50th anniversary thing on the back there. So this, of all the new alternate covers for the core rulebooks, this one, hands down, is my absolute favorite. So really, really cool. If you're looking to get the new version, the 5th edition, and you do have a local game store in your area, if you're looking to get the book, I think this cover is absolutely fantastic. The inside contents are the exact same. The prices should be the exact same, although I have seen some places that will sell the alternate covers for more than the regular covers. Not so sure I like that, so if your store is doing that, then maybe not, but this is a really fantastic cover. All right, so a few things to note. Again, I'm not going to be doing like huge flip-throughs or anything like that, but there are some really big notes that I do have on the brand new Monster Manual that I think are worth sharing. And for the most part, I like a lot of the changes that were made to like the formatting. So, for example, this is a truly alphabetized version of the Monster Manual. So you no longer have things like giants and dragons and demons and devils all grouped together. They literally will appear based off the first letter of their creature name. So like the Baelor, the Black Dragon and the Blue Dragon are in the B section. The Red Dragon is in the R section. The Hill Giant would be in the H section. And for people that have been using monster manuals for, in my case, 26 years now, or almost 26 years, which is crazy to think about, it's going to take a little bit of getting used to, although, honestly, I think it's a change that I kind of like, because if I'm trying to find like the Blue Dragon or the Black Dragon, it's easier to go from the front of the book and flip to the B section. And if you're a beginner, it's also going to be a lot easier to sort of understand the flow of the book. So I think that this is another change that was made with sort of like beginners in mind. Because if you're brand new to the hobby, you might not know that a Glabrezu is a demon instead of like a devil or just a regular monster. So trying to find it in the G section is not going to happen if you were using like the older monster manual. So I think it is sort of a beginner-friendly change that was made. Some other changes, though, that I think are really, really notable that I really do like is that the NPCs are now just sort of in the book again in alphabetical order. So the assassin is in the A section, the berserker is in the B section, along with the bandit, and then you have the the cultists are in the C section. And I really like having them just sort of mixed in the book that way rather than trying to find them sort of at the back of the book. It's just a personal preference thing, but I do like that that change was made. I'll talk a little bit more about them, however, because there is one thing that I would have liked to have seen included with them or somewhere in the book, and I didn't see it, so if it is in there, I apologize and I just missed it. I just got this book yesterday at the time that I'm recording this, so I haven't had a lot of time to spend with it quite yet. But I did flip through it, and I really did like a lot of what I saw there. So one other thing is that creatures' hit dice are now dependent on their size rather than their creature type. So the bigger the creature gets, the larger their hit die gets. So I guess it kind of simulates how difficult it is to strike the vital organs of something that's the size of an apartment building, for example. So if you're tiny or smaller, you're rolling d4s for hit dice. If you're small, it's d6s. Mediums are d8s, and then if you're large, the hit dice are d10s. Huge, the hit dice are d12s, and for gargantuan creatures, the largest size category in the game, the hit die is actually d20s. And that improves some things right off the bat because, for example, your ancient dragons are all gargantuan size. So when I was running dragons in the original Monster Manual, one of the things that I always had to do was up their hit points because they just didn't have enough to really stick around for very long. I would either maximize or give them like 3/4 of their hit die in hit points. But if you're looking at, for example, the ancient dragons now rolling d20s, even using their average, which is 11.5, I think it rounds up to 12, their average now is what the max was in the previous Monster Manual where they were rolling d12s. So it just bumps the hit points. Like the ancient red dragon has over 500 hit points now, and I think that works fairly well. So I like that change to it. One thing that is not in this book, though, are stat blocks for the races or species from the player's handbook. So your dwarves, your elves, your half-elves, your halflings, your gnomes, humans, Aasimar, tiefling, dragonborn, and orcs don't have their own dedicated stat blocks in here. And I have seen some people complaining about that online, and I thought it would bother me more than it really does. And the reason that it doesn't really bother me is because, like, historically speaking, going back to like 3rd edition, for example, stats for like the regular orc or the regular dwarf or elf were pretty useless, right? You had to basically add class levels to them anyway in order to make them worth running. So they ended up becoming NPCs anyway. So the thought process is that the NPC stat blocks are now basically they could be anything. Like you could have a halfling bandit or a half-orc bandit, like a half-orc or an orc assassin. You could have like a dragonborn berserker. So you can basically adapt the NPC stat blocks however you want them to be. So they can be whatever race or species that you want them to be. And I do like that change. What I didn't see in the book, however, was a table or rules for converting them from kind of like their base stats to like having the abilities of something like an orc, which the orc has an ability where if they are reduced to 0 for the first time each day, they can instead be reduced to 1 hit point, so they get to stick around for another attack. Or that they can, I think, charge as was it a free action or something that they can do like at the beginning of combat. I forget exactly what sort of abilities that they get, but I don't see anything in the book about modifying the NPCs to give them things like the dwarf's tremor sense now, for example. I don't see that in the new monster manual, and I think that would have been a really handy thing to have. In the back of the book, there is a conversion table for the 2014 Monster Manual, which does focus heavily on things like orcs and like those creatures that aren't presented here in their raw form, so to speak. And it gives you like what stat block is a suitable substitution. But like I said, I like the fact that they're just can be grouped in with the NPCs now, because that gives you a lot more options straight out of the book. But it would have been nice to have had like a list of what abilities to add to them. So that could be something like if they do a card set later on, then it might be cool to see, for example, like an NPC card set where you've got multiple cards for the same stat block, but just modified by each of the player's handbook races. I think would be good. But if I were to change one thing, I would include what traits to add to the NPCs to convert them from like their kind of like base human form or implied human form to dwarf, elf, halfling, gnome, all those different ones there. So that's the one thing that I would change there. Now, again, I'm not going to go through the entire book, but I will say that looking through this, they definitely did a great job of improving several of the higher level, higher challenge rating creatures. And I'm going to focus on two of them really for the purpose of this video, and I bumped the tripod there. So the first one is, of course, going to be my favorite monster of all time, which is the Beholder. So here we've got the Beholder's stat blocks. And the one thing that's really great about the stat blocks in this book, there's a couple of things that I really, really like. So number one, the saving throw bonuses are right next to the ability score modifiers. So it's a lot easier to know kind of at a quick glance what their saving throws are. Because in the other Monster Manual, they wouldn't list them all unless they actually had like a different bonus, which is fine, but I like the fact that they're grouped together. But another thing that I absolutely love there is the proficiency bonus that is listed in the stat block now, which I don't believe was in the 2014 Monster Manual. I'm just going to have to do it. Just a quick look here because I don't want to be wrong. But I do remember having to work it out myself using, like, when I created my Eye of Frost Beholder. So, yeah, the proficiency bonus is now listed in the stat block, which is fantastic. Now, the Beholder still has some things about it that I don't like. For example, their eye rays are still meant to be determined randomly. But again, you've got, a creature with a super high level of intelligence compared to like the average person. So I still don't really like that version of it. They do have their legendary resistance, which I don't know if they actually had before. So again, I do have the other Monster Manual here with me. And actually, the original Beholder did not have legendary resistance. So that is another change that I just saw now that I didn't realize was actually a change. Layers, they don't have layer actions anymore for creatures that had layer actions before, but they do incorporate some elements of like a Beholder being in its layer into its stat block. So, for example, if it's in its layer, it gets legendary resistance an extra time per day, and it gets an extra legendary action that it can use if it's within its layer. And layers will still have regional effects that, will indicate that there is something sort of nearby there. So that's really cool. But the random eye rays, I'm still not a huge fan of. And I definitely plan on sort of making some changes when I go to run a Beholder in my campaign using this new Monster Manual. I also had a bit of, I don't know if it's like a Mandela effect or just like remembering things wrongly, but I could have sworn that the original Beholder in this book had all of its eye rays as dex saves, but they're not. So the things that weren't dex saves that aren't dex saves here weren't dex saves in the other book. So I did kind of remember that incorrectly. I think it's because of Disintegration and like Death Ray being dex saves, which were ones that were used quite frequently, which I still find is kind of weird. But I did look up the Disintegration spell in the 5th edition Player's Handbook. And it's a dexterity save, and I think even in the 2014 one, it was also a dex save, as opposed to a fortitude save, which it always, or like a con save, which it always used to be. So that's actually in line with what the spell is, and I had actually house ruled my beholder to have disintegration ray as a constitution save, because I thought that's what the spell was, and I had the death ray as a wisdom save, because I thought it was sort of based off of like the old will saves from back in the day. But anyway, death ray is not actually the finger of death that like the old beholders used to have either, so it is a little bit different. So I think I'll actually be keeping that the same way, and I think I might even keep the fact that the beholder doesn't roll to attack with its eye rays anymore. You do lose the opportunity to like score criticals, but I think the beholder is pretty good as is, and the biggest reason that I think the beholder is really good is that it's anti-magic cone. So in the 2014 monster manual here, we'll go over to the beholder. So its anti-magic cone had to be determined at the start of each of its turns, which basically meant the beholder had to choose between using its eye rays or just putting the player characters in an area of anti-magic, sort of limiting their items or their abilities, but not really being able to do much more than that. So now the beholder's central eye can be opened or closed as a bonus action. Or basically, I guess, opened as a bonus action. So it could be done now at any part of its turn. And I actually was texting back and forth with a buddy of mine yesterday because I really like that change. It means that the beholder can now use its eye rays and then open its anti-magic eye and force the characters into movement. The beholder lacks the limitation of like only being able to fire so many eye rays in a like 90-degree arc, which is what they had in previous editions, which was another reason why they would want to force characters to kind of move around so they could target with more of their eye rays. But I really like the fact that the beholder's central eye is now kind of useful, because when I ran beholders before, because they had to choose at the beginning of their turn, unless the party was arrayed in such a way that it was really beneficial to have somebody in an anti-magic cone and then the other people were spread enough that I could target them with the other eye rays, I just never really used it. His concern was that the beholder will likely have a layer that's set up in such a way that he can use his anti-magic eye in that cone and make it very difficult for the players to be able to move out of that area, and then at the beginning of his next turn can just close his eye, fire off eye rays, and open it back up. And that is true. The prospect of fighting a creature in its own lair should be a desperation thing. It should be kind of like a last resort, or it should be going into it expecting there to be some sort of casualties. I kind of thought about what he said. Again, I think that it makes sense. I think that it's tactically sound. But I was curious about how other editions handled the Beholder's Eye. And we're going to take a look here at the 3rd edition Monster Manual. Now, the 3.5 Monster Manual, the Beholder, the text for the Beholder's Central Eye, Anti-Magic Eye, is the exact same. But how often do I actually open up the 3rd edition, the 3.0 Monster Manual here? So let's just find the Beholder really quick. And with the Beholder's Anti-Magic Cone in 3rd edition, you just had to do it during the Beholder's turn. So it didn't have to be during the beginning of its turn. It didn't have to be specifically at the end of its turn. It could be at any point during the Beholder's turn that it can open or close its eye. So 3rd edition allowed you to do the exact same thing that the Beholder can now do in 5th edition, and I think that this works really, really well. The one change, again, that I would make to the Beholder is that on its turn, it gets to use its eye rays 3 times. And what I would do is I would have the Beholder be allowed to choose what those eye rays are when it's its initiative turn. So, for example, a Beholder is smart enough to understand that the character wearing heavy plate mail armor and wielding a 2-handed sword is going to be more prone to something like its Charm Ray or its Fear Ray than the character wearing heavy armor but decked out in like holy symbols, or who's uttering prayers as he's casting spells during combat, or like a wizard, for example. He would also know that the character wearing a robe and throwing things like magic missile might be more susceptible to something like a petrification ray, which targets their constitution, which is something that is not necessarily a wizard strength. So I think that when the beholder is on its initiative turn, it should be able to choose which eye rays it uses. However, for its legendary actions, it can use its eye rays, so it gets 3 actions or 3 uses of this normally, or 4 actions or 4 uses of it in its lair. So I would say that if it's using the legendary action, what I would be doing is rolling randomly. It kind of replicates the aura that the 4th edition beholder had, where on its normal initiative turn, it could actively use its eye rays in ways that made sense. It could target like specific creatures with specific eye rays, but when somebody was within a certain area of the beholder at the start of their turn, they would just get hit with a random eye ray. You do have the limitation as well that the random eye ray an eye ray can't be used twice in the same round. So if you use Death Ray, Disintegration, and Petrification as its 3, then they can't be used randomly later in that same turn anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be that game-breaking, but it just makes the creature a lot more powerful. And again, I think that overall, the change to the beholder, just this one little change, really, really helps there. So that's one thing that I think is really, really positive. Here's an example of one of the NPC stats being incorporated. They also have things like what treasure types, based off of lists in the DMG, are suitable for the creatures that are found in this book as well. So I think that's really, really cool. The next creature, the second creature that I really want to focus on in this book, is going to be one that I was thoroughly disappointed with in the 2014 DMG, and that is going to be the Dracolich. So here we've got just some really fantastic artwork, and there's some really great art all throughout this book, and I like the fact that they kind of have like scenes with the creatures in them. It's not just like the artwork of the creature kind of in isolation with just like white around it, which I don't think the 2014 one had a lot of, but other monster manuals, like again, for example, if we just open up the 3rd edition one, like a lot of these creatures are just their monster art. There are some scenery, but like there's just like the monster with like nothing around it. So I like the fact that the artwork is really like trying to tell sort of a story there. You can also see like the representation of the necrotic breath weapon, having like the images of like skulls and stuff, and I think that's really, really cool. But let's take a look at the Dracolich's stats here, and I want to compare it to the completely underwhelming waste of time that was the Dracolich in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. So, or Monster Manual, I should say, sorry. So, a little bit of backstory. Dracoliches are some of my favorite creatures in D&D. I absolutely love using them in my campaigns. I'm a huge fan of undead, and I just thought like Dracoliches were really, really awesome. Now, Dracoliches would always have some sort of like modifications to their stats in other editions of the game. So like even something simple like a paralyzing touch, which was similar to a regular lich's. So I was expecting there to be some sort of modification to the Dracolich from the 5th edition one. But in the original 5e, here's what they get. Their type changes to undead. They get damage resistance to necrotic, not immunity, just resistance to necrotic. They get immunity to poison, and it also retains any immunities that it had before, and it can't be charmed, frightened, paralyzed, or poisoned, and doesn't suffer from exhaustion, and gets advantage on saving throws versus magic. That's all that changes. So if you're a green dragon Dracolich, the one like immunity that does get added to the dragon stats is redundant. So that like is kind of crappy. But again, you just look at the regular, it's just a regular dragon. The only thing is now that it's undead, it doesn't even change its breath weapon type. So when I was running a Dracolich in using this monster manual, I at least had their breath weapon deal necrotic damage. So, but everything else was really underwhelming. The Dracolich in this new book is honestly terrifying, and I love it. So let's just look at its lair here first. So if you are within 1 mile of its lair, the surrounding area is sort of covered in a pale fog, and whenever a creature other than the Dracolich or one of its allies finishes a long rest in the area, it must succeed on a DC 15 con save or gain 1 level of exhaustion. So if there's like a settlement in that area within 1 mile of a dragon's lair, a Dracolich's lair, then like it could wipe out the entire village or town or whatever just from sheer exhaustion. And that is crazy. And it already gave me an instant idea of how to incorporate that into an adventure. And I might have to write that out because I kind of like the idea. It creates a bit of a mystery for players that aren't aware of like the Dracolich's lair ability, so I may have given it away. I know one of the players in my 5e game is, watches the channel, so I don't know if he'll watch the whole video. Hopefully he doesn't see this part of it, but yeah, I love that. And they also have the soul drain ability, so if you are within 1 mile of a Dracolich's lair and you are forced to make a death saving throw, you do it at disadvantage, which makes the prospect of stabilizing through death saves a lot more difficult now. And I think that's really, really cool. But there's some other things that we have in here. Number one, dragons have spellcasting by default now. It's no longer an optional thing that you have to figure out on your own. They don't get a ton of spells at their disposal, but it's still cool that they get these available as options for them. So the Dracolich gets Detect Magic, Ray of Sickness as at will, and then can create Undead or Finger of Death each once per day. They do have the Sickening Ray, which is a legendary action. They do get extra actions in their lair, along with extra legendary resistances if they're in their lair. And you don't want to fight a Dracolich in its lair. Its breath weapon is now necrotic, which is, again, a big change that I think is for the better. But here's the biggest one that is absolutely horrifying. They get this new ability called Life Suppression. So basically, the theme for the Dracolich here is that the necrotic energy that permeates this creature, that animates it and sustains it, is so strong because of probably like the dragon's size, I would imagine, that it has an effect on the surrounding countryside with the, zapping the life force from, anybody within a mile as they rest, or the luring creatures or, to their death by imposing disadvantage on their saving throws. But the life suppression has it so that any creature within 60 feet of a Dracolich cannot regain hit points. So if you fight a Dracolich in its lair, you kind of have it try to put it in a room so that if you are in this chamber with the Dracolich, you're always within 60 feet of it, then you can't regain hit points. And if you are knocked unconscious, you're going to have disadvantage on the death saves. Now, the stabilize cantrip will still work because it doesn't regain hit points, it just stabilizes you. And that will make that cantrip a literal lifesaver. So the Dracolich went from the crappiest inclusion, in my opinion, in the 2014 Monster Manual to one of the best stat blocks in this entire book. So this book has done, again, a really just fantastic job of giving creatures, especially high-level ones, some more tricks that they can use now to make combat more challenging. And that's kind of what you want, right? Like, I think that the changes to the hit dice alone, the hit die size, like, I don't think I would need to maximize an Ancient Dragon's hit dice anymore, or hit points anymore, because they're rolling d20s and their average is already what their maximum used to be. So that is a huge improvement. Dragons have spell casting now, which is great. They have other abilities, like I think the black dragon can summon the swarm of insects that can impose disadvantage on concentration checks. which is, again, something that can be really damning to spellcasters. There, the Tarask has also seen some really cool improvements. So it has now a 150-foot cone sonic blast that it can use, that makes it so that you can't just stay back and pelt it now, because it also has a ranged attack, but it also has this really cool legendary action where it can charge up to its speed. And at the end of the charge, because it's so massive and it's causing basically an earthquake as it's running, as it's moving, any medium or smaller character is automatically knocked prone if they were on the ground just because of the force of the shaking, and it automatically cancels any concentration or spells that a caster was concentrating on. So again, it just these little things, these little tricks that give the monsters a bit more bite to them, pun intended, that just really, makes them, again, just a bit more of a threat, a bit more of a challenge. And when I was looking through this monster manual, the first thing that I really thought was that I don't think I really need to change much anymore. Like when I was running this version of the monster manual, I was always bumping up hit points or doing other things to make the creatures just be able to last more than a round or two against the player characters. And I think this does a pretty solid job of improving monsters to make them more of a threat. Like I think that I think this book far exceeds this book here, and I have no desire to go back to this monster manual because I have this one now. So I really like a lot of the changes that they made. I love the idea that fighting a creature in its lair is extremely dangerous. Like I said, the Dracolich got this huge upgrade there. So I think overall, this is an incredible monster book. And even if you don't plan on necessarily upgrading to like the full, the full new range of 5e books, if you were only to pick one of all of the books that are like of the 3 core books, if you were only to get one that you would use to replace the book that, from the original 5e, then this monster manual blows this one out of the water, in my opinion. It has a few, like I said, a few little things about it, like it's fully alphabetical now, so you have to look for like giants and dragons and demons and devils based off of their name and not their creature type. And you do have the NPC stat blocks incorporated here, with the Player's Handbook races not having their own special stat blocks, as they can now be incorporated into the NPCs there. I do, like I said, I do wish that they had a table of abilities to add to the creatures based off of what the Player's Handbook race gets, but it is something that would be easy enough to do if you really, if you really wanted to. But yeah, the 2025 or 2024, the 50th anniversary monster manual, again, even if you don't plan on upgrading or updating all of your core rulebooks to the new version, if you just want a monster manual that is far better to use right as is without needing to make some modifications to make the creatures more challenging, then this book is it. So again, if you only get one of the new core rulebooks, my recommendation would be to get this one here. Anyway, let me know in the comments below, what is your favorite 5e monster? What monster are you most looking forward to trying or seeing its updates in the new monster manual? Again, some creatures are pretty similar. We do have also like new vampire types. The Death Knight has some new servant stat block that can be used there. So there's just a lot of really cool stuff in this book overall. And yeah, the Monster Manual is hands down, it's always been one of my favorite books anyway. And this one just, in my opinion, really just blows everything else out of the water. So yeah, this book is never coming off my shelf again unless I'm making a video using it. But to run games, this is going to be my Monster Manual going forward. Anyway, let me know in the comments, like I said, what are your favorite monsters? Are you getting the new Monster Manual? If so, are you getting the Game Store exclusive cover, or are you just going to get the regular retail cover? Let me know all that in the comments below. Anyway, thank you all so very much for watching. I truly appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.